Now we move on to the impulse momentum section of the test. And here we have a tennis ball shot from a tennis ball machine at 30 meters per second. We're going to assume that it starts from rest. And so what that means is that the initial velocity will be 0, and that this is the final velocity. Now, one thing we want to note is when they ask us for the impulse, the temptation is to look for a force and a time. But the impulse momentum theorem tells us that F times t equals mv minus mu. So we're going to actually use the change in momentum to get the impulse. So that's going to be 0.1 times 30 minus 0.1 times 0. And when we calculate this, that's going to end up being 3 Newton seconds as our impulse. Now we're going to use the definition of impulse to get the force. So let's remember that the impulse is the force times the time. We actually calculated that as 3 Newton seconds above. That's going to equal the force times our time of 0.004. And so when we simplify this, we're going to end up getting a force of 750 newtons. Next. All right. Next, the ball is traveling at 30 meters per second. It hits a racket and bounces back at a speed of 35 meters per second. What is the impulse given to the ball? So one thing I want to point out is we'll send the tennis ball in this way, but then it bounces back the other way. That means the velocity changes direction. So we can say that it comes in at a speed of plus 30, but then it exits at a speed of negative 35. So let's get the impulse using the change in momentum. So that's going to be mv minus mu. So that's going to be 0.1 times negative 35 minus 0.1 times 30. And that's going to give us negative 6.5 Newton seconds as the impulse. And now we're going to go ahead and get the force using a similar calculation to what we did previously. So the impulse is the force times the time. Negative 6.5 is going to equal our force multiplied by the 0.002. And when we actually simplify, that's going to give us a force of a little over 3 tons, so 3,250 newtons of force, which is actually quite reasonable in this situation. Well, given how hard we're hitting the tennis ball. All right, so that is the next page on the practice test.